From Byfleet to the Bush, an autobiography by Jacqueline Pearce. Chapter 1. Byfleet. I loved my life in Byfleet. No, I didn't. I loved Byfleet, not the life I lived there. I was born in Woking, Surrey on December 20th, 1943, and brought home to Queen's Avenue in Byfleet, which in those days was a small country village. Our avenue was lined with chestnut trees, so my parents, who were not known for their originality, named the house Chestnuts, and there I remained for the first 17 years of my life. My mother didn't, but more about that later. At the bottom of our garden was a large field, in the centre of which was a perfectly manicured, emerald green cricket pitch, where men dressed in pristine whites would play on drowsy Sunday afternoons. I loved the cricket field. In summer it would be carpeted with celandines, buttercups and daisies, which I would weave into chains and place on my head and around my neck. All the houses on our side of the avenue had gardens, with gates at the bottom that opened onto the field, enabling neighbours to chat together and children to play. Cowboys and Indians was a great favourite, but being the only girl in my peer group, I was always the lone Indian, captured and bound to a tree, while Anthony Wand, Jeremy Bean and John Bragg fired my arrows at me. I still have a small scar on my right eyebrow, a reminder of the time when Ant got lucky. In order to gain admission into their gang, I had to squeeze a bunch of stinging nettles and not make any sound at all. In the autumn we played in the avenue, as the chestnut trees filled the street with russet-coloured leaves, in which we could hide and roll around, flinging great armfuls at each other, and shed huge, shiny conkers which we threaded onto lengths of string and had glorious conker fights. When I look back on my childhood, I am very aware of the comfort I received from nature and the feel of the late 1940s and early 50s. I can still recall the sense of clover and huge red roses, their velvety petals heavy with morning dew, wild narcissi, bluebells and lily of the valley, the aroma of burning leaves and wood smoke as the melancholy of autumn hovered in the still air. My favourite season was, and remains, winter. Jack Frost leaving intricate patterns on the inside of my bedroom window, sheets frozen on the washing line as dusk descended, snowmen with cold noses and clay pipes, whose jolly daytime demeanour became slightly sinister as night began to fall. More than anything, I loved snow, its ability to transform all that was familiar into a fairy tale world of magic, mystery, and overwhelming beauty. I came home from school one December afternoon. It was dusk, and had snowed heavily all day. I ran down the garden to the cricket field, pushed open the gate, and entered a magic world. A blood-red sun was setting in a darkening sky. The bare branches of the trees were rimmed with silver frost. The cricket pavilion, now the palace of the Snow Queen, and the snow before me still in its virgin state. I wanted to stay in that world of beauty forever. I raised my 4-year-old arms to the setting sun and ran towards it. I believed I could fly, that I was part of all that surrounded me, protected me, and claimed me as its own. I loved sweets, and when rationing finally ended in the mid-50s, I feasted on Rolos, Maltesers, Mars bars and Smarties. I haunted the sweet shops in the village with their large glass jars containing lemonade powder, a great favourite, sticky black and white striped bullseyes, treacle toffees, pear drops and Everton mints. I loved the dark interiors of the shops, each with its own smells and character. Lucas's was our nearest grocery shop. A brass bell rang as the door was opened, and counters lined 3 sides of its large interior. On the left was the slicer, where bacon, ham and gammon were sliced. On the right, the cheese cutter, where delicious crumbly cheddar was cut with a wire, before being wrapped in greaseproof paper and popped into a brown paper bag. Mrs. Lucas, at the counter in the centre, sold broken biscuits for a penny per quarter pound, and was very popular with the village children. So all in all, I had a great affection for bucolic Byfleet. I suppose now I should explain why I didn't like the life I lived there. For the first 6 months of my life, our house was occupied by my parents, Reginald and Stella Pearce, and myself. In June of 1944, in an attempt to make some much-needed extra money, my father advertised the front room and a bedroom for rent. My father was exempt from war service due to his employment at Vickers Armstrong, a factory involved with the manufacturing of aircraft, although I understand he did some sterling work in the Home Guard. His advertisement was answered by a young woman in her 20s, May Wilcox, whose husband George was in the Navy. She accepted the rooms, moved in, and was joined on his occasional spells of home leave by George. So the house now contained 2 families, the Pearces and the Wilcoxes. 10 months later, my mother, having decided that domesticity was not for her, left my father and myself in search of more exciting pastures. After discussion with May, a decision was reached. When the war ended, she and George would both live with us, she as housekeeper and substitute mother, he to continue his pre-war work in some clerical capacity, also at Vickers Armstrong. George would also become my legal guardian in the event of my father's demise. So they assumed the roles of foster parents. I called May mother, her husband uncle, and my father father. The loss of my mother at the age of 16 months was the defining moment of my life. It has informed everything I have been and become. Its influence might have become less intense in later life had I successfully bonded with May. The insecurity I experienced might not have been as chronic. Just before my 3rd birthday, I was sent to stay with my father's sister, Auntie Wynne, and her husband, Uncle Fred, in Upminster, Essex. I loved staying with Auntie Wynne. She had 1 child herself, my cousin Peter, who, being 10 years older, occupied a different planet. Auntie Wynne loved having a little girl around, and spent hours twisting my long, dark brown hair around strips of rag, which would result in ringlets when she removed them the following morning. The love, kindness, and attention that Auntie Wynne showed me during those difficult early years is something I have never forgotten. When I returned to Byfleet, having spent Christmas and my 3rd birthday in Upminster, it was to discover that May and George had had their own child, a daughter called Maxine, her impending birth being the reason for my stay in Upminster. No one had told me that this was on the cards. I simply arrived home to find that I had lost my substitute mother to her own child. So by the age of 3, I had lost not only my birth mother, but also my substitute mother, and had a highly unorthodox home life, quite unlike that of any of my contemporaries. My father was an extremely strict parent. I was born left-handed, which I was forced to change. Much later in life, I discovered that this was because my birth mother was also left-handed, and my father wanted no evidence of her in me at all. So terrified was he that I would resemble my mother in later life, that he held on very tightly to his own idea of who he wanted me to become. As an adult, I grew to understand that whatever else he wanted me to be, he didn't want me to be in any way a sexual being. And by sending me to a convent, he very nearly obtained his wish. I think he found my mother's sexuality threatening, and believed at some level that his inability to satisfy her sexually was a large factor in her decision to leave him.